Yeah, so folks can check their badge since they all look alike. Okay. All right, so we're going to get started with this panel. And this is going to be Sisters Made Visible, the Impacts of Incarceration and Violence on Women and Girls. And after, this panel is going to run until 4:30. Then we'll have some free time for folks to kind of process, get loose, take a walk. And then dinner will begin at 6 o'clock. And then after, when dinner starts, we'll be in the pavilion. So we'll start dinner at 6, and then at about 6:30, we'll have our final panel for the day. That one is going to be entitled, We Are the 1 in 4, Testimonies from Women with Incarcerated Loved Ones. That's where you'll get an opportunity to hear from some of our Essie sisters about their experiences. And then after that, we'll have just free time by the fire, s'mores, dancing in here, a chance to kind of bond. So that's kind of the way the rest of our day looks today. So I'm going to circle back to our panel right now. So this panel is really talking about learning what's going on with women as it pertains to the intersection between the criminal justice system, the race justice system, and the gender justice system. And sort of how women, both personally and professionally, have experienced all of those systems and the intersection between them. Our facilitator today is Monique Morris. Yes. And I'm really excited to hear from Monique and hear her questions on this issue because she just published a book earlier this month, January 5th, called Push Out, the Criminalization of Black... I'm sorry, March? What? Oh. The internet was wrong. The internet was wrong. I'm sorry. The criminalization of Black girls in schools. And this is really sort of dear to me. I just told Monique this, but my 13-year-old niece, who is like my road dog, really love her. She's like my soulmate. Recently, last year, my sister called me and said, she got into a fight at school and they had put her into the juvenile system. And it was really just like, what are you talking about? And as a public defender, whenever I hear something like that, someone's gone and talked to the authorities and just like, no. And so it really scared me. And I know that's an experience that a lot of us have for our young girls, young boys, for our families. So I'm really interested to hear that this issue is kind of coming to the front because it's just like another thing that they're adding to what they're doing to our communities. And so excited to hear. And I just also want to sort of share a tweet that I found on Monique's Twitter page that I really loved. I know, she's like, what? I promise, it's good. And it was in December, and she said, I wish a song could really liberate people from the throes of ignorance, exploitation, and addiction. I will always love this play. And it was about The Wiz live. And so that really touched me because, again, most people see me since yesterday, music is something I use to try to really cope with all of this. And so I love that she said that because I really do wish the same thing. So yeah, I'll turn it over to Monique.
Thank you. I am honored to be on panel and facilitating a discussion with 3 outstanding women who have been leading in this work for so many years and engaged in this struggle personally, professionally, spiritually, emotionally. And I feel that it is my duty just to try to do everything I can to uplift those that I am sitting with right now. And so we have Misty Rojo, who is with Justice Now, and Susan Burton, who is the co-founder of A New Way of Life, and Noyola with the Transgender Law Center, and me, right, for the next hour and a half. And this is a panel that's called Sisters Made Visible. And, I want to, before we start, we've spent some time workshopping different ideas, both last night and this morning and this early afternoon. And I want to invite you all to close your eyes on this panel called Sisters Made Visible. So I'm going to ask you all to close your eyes. I'm going to ask everybody to take a deep breath. And I want to read, with your eyes closed, I want to ask you to listen to the last verse of a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar called Sympathy. And it reads, I know why the caged bird sings, ah me, when his wing is bruised and his bosom sore, when he beats his bars and he would be free. It is not a carol of joy or glee, but a prayer that he sends from his heart's deep core, but a plea that upward to heaven he flings. I know why the caged bird sings. And I'll invite you to open your eyes. And I want to start with this poem. I used to teach at the University of San Francisco, and one of the ways in which we would talk about this poem was to deconstruct it in the context of oppression and talk about what it means in this context of oppression and power and privilege. And much of what we've been talking about from last night with the conversation between Michelle and Gina asking us about how we willingly participate in systems that are oppressive, to this morning's deconstruction of patriarchy and ways in which we can set up multiple definitions for engaging. Ultimately, this campaign, the Stand With Her campaign, is not a stand for her campaign. It's not a stand in place of her, stand behind her. It's stand with her, because we have all been in spaces where we're uplifting the narratives of women and the narratives of individuals who have been impacted by this thing called incarceration, or that we call incarceration, but that is ultimately a structural form of oppression. And so this, when we talk about this work, and we talk about making sisters visible, one of the things that we want to do is recognize, continuing the conversation about deconstructing patriarchy and understanding what feminism means in this context, is to understand, too, how powerful our stories are. One of the things that came out of this morning was a statement that when we start to tell our stories, individuals will start to understand more what we're dealing with and how we're engaged in this process of liberation. And often our stories are relegated as something secondary, or our conditions, sort of put to the side. And what I'm hopeful that we can start, what I'd like to start this panel discussion with, is an invitation for you to talk about how your story has helped you engage in a work, a body of work. So again, recognizing that we've been in this for a while now. Like, there are some folks who are just entering, and that's beautiful, but I'm gonna start with you, Miss Susan, because some of us have been engaged in this work for a really long time and who have laid a platform for us to engage. And so, can you talk a little bit about how your personal narrative has informed the consciousness that you bring to this work?
So I'm going to take you back to, can you hear me? So I want to take you back to 1981. And I walked my 5-year-old son home from school and went in the kitchen to prepare dinner, and he was outside playing, and the next thing I know, he had been ran over by a car. He had been killed, and he had been killed by a LAPD detective. The detective never stopped the car. He probably radioed and they told him to come in, and nonetheless, my son was dead. And all the emotions, all the sadness, all the grief, all the rage, all the pain just, fell on me. And it was during that period where our communities became saturated with drugs. So I remember directly after the funeral, I began to drink. And then that escalated to drug use, and I was incarcerated. I was incarcerated not one time, but 6 times, always for possession of a drug. And October 4th of 1997, I found this place in Santa Monica, California, an affluent community, and they helped me. They helped me with my grief. I got therapy, I got counseling, I got directed to the rooms of 12 steps, I got just a bunch of stuff. And I couldn't understand for the life of me why this hadn't happened in my community of South LA, where so many women were being, I'll say trafficked in and out the criminal justice system. So what happened is, you know, I worked for about a year, got a house, and I began to go downtown where I knew all my friends were getting off the bus. And I tell them, girl, I have a house, and you can come here, and we can build this community. So that's how New Way of Life started. And it's with that same commitment that it continues. It's with that same commitment to meet women right where they are and support them. I remember in the first house, there's 5 houses now, and over 900 women have been through those homes. But I remember the first house, and I need to shout out to Karen Shane. My first trip to San Francisco, I sat in an office with her and a whole bunch of other women, and I was telling them about what I did. And they were saying, oh, this is phenomenal. And then they started saying, I will never complain again. I will never do this, I will never do that, because you see, I didn't want a paycheck. You know, I didn't want any light. You know, I didn't want anything but to stop another woman from needlessly going back into the prison system. So Karen wrote me a fellowship for the California Wellness, and that fellowship allowed me to learn how to run an organization. And it was a 2-year fellowship. And it also gave me $50,000. Oh, that was a lot of money. But, you know, it's with that type of commitment. And I just want to say, we were talking about money and resources and systems. You know, how can we expect these systems to do anything but what they do? How can we expect to take ourselves and actually really like change them? What I did is that, you know, I was contracted with probation and so forth, probation and Health Right 360 to provide housing for women, and it was a fee for service. Well, June 30th, I terminated every contract that I had because what came along with the contract was oppression, was surveillance, was mistreatment of the women that I said, yes, I'll protect you. Yes, you'll have a safe place. Yes, we'll support you. And it represented a couple of $100,000 a year. But we're fine. You know, we're not bidding the man's stuff, you know, for the sake of having some financial security or insecurity, because it was really difficult to go to bed at night understanding what was happening through a New Way of Life. So I'll leave it with that, leave it there, and say thank you, Karen Shane.
So, Misty, your narrative has also driven your work and engaged you in a particular consciousness formation around this anti-violence, anti-incarceration space.
I've never thought about it in those terms, so let me see if I can articulate how I got here. I've always been that person that's labeled as doesn't do well with authority, doesn't play well with others, just, I still am. I wear it a lot prouder now. But I think it's informed me in the way of looking for those very alternatives, knowing that I am much of the system's definition of a failure to this day. Knowing that there's other people like me, that it's not a one-size-fits-all. But I think the other thing that drives it is, you know, I left home when I was 14, so to go way back, I grew up, my mother had me and my brother from my father. So my mother's white, my father's not. My father is Native. My mother married another white man, a very racist white man. So I grew up hearing, I mean, when I was 5 years old, our landlords knocked on the door and I was like, the gooks are at the door in front of their face. I had no idea that was a very racialized term. I had no idea what I was saying. I was repeating what I heard. And as poor white people have learned to do from the top down teaching is blame those further oppressed for their oppression. And that included us. We were the reason my parents couldn't buy a house. We were the reason every problem was me and my brother's fault because we were not good enough. We could not measure up. We were not. So I always belonged and didn't belong in either side. And so that informed a lot of it. So I left home and ran the streets and thought I, dropped out of, I never even went to high school. Got my GED on the first try when I turned 18. That was miraculous. I wasn't smart enough to figure out how to turn that into a college education, though, to the person who did that on the last panel. I had no idea. But anyway, so spent a lot of time in a lot of violence experience. You can imagine what a 14-year-old person, what I experienced from 14 years old in the streets, but also committed a lot of violence. Got married at 18, had my children in very, very, very violent relationship, left that, started selling drugs, I started selling drugs because I just wanted to have a dining room table for my kids. Started doing drugs because I was in school and I just wanted to study for my midterms. 2 months later, I was fighting a life sentence for committing a violent act. So just knowing that the roads and the various ways in which we get to prison and then getting there and watching 8 people die in my first year within 3 months and looking at that floor knowing I had 10 years left to pull and saying, I don't want to die on this floor. Beyond that, when I was running amok in the prison, angry that I'm gone from my kids, I have no way to get home, and people like running off to fight, and someone who used to be a board member with Justice now, someone who's up there resting in power, Madeline, took me outside and was like, we're gonna go smoke a cigarette. I was on my way to fight and they just kind of scooped me, and if anybody has ever known Madeline, not a small person, and kind of scooped me and was like, no, we're gonna go smoke a cigarette. And somehow within seconds we were talking about my mom and I was crying. And it was a way of saying that what's driving your anger and what's driving all this is deeper than what you think you're mad at. And so knowing that those are the people that sit behind walls, why? Why are they there? Why are they still there? So I think what informs my work is knowing that it was those people inside, not the ones in green, but the ones in blue that saved me and taught me that my voice mattered and taught me that I'm articulate, taught me my own power. It took someone else to show me the power I had, and they set me off, and I became a peer educator and got to go around the prison talking to people, and it resonated, and it lit a fire, and they created a monster with me. So, I enjoy that I'm not what authority likes to see coming. I enjoy that the same officers that could abuse me, watch me shower, strip me down, now there's lobbyists, runs and sits in another row when they see me coming because they know what the truth is and they know I'm going to tell it and I'm not going to sit there and bullshit. They know I'm going to hold the line for my community. Don't ask me to get to my folks if you're not going to treat them with dignity, if you're not going to give them results, and if you're not accountable to them. Don't come at me 8 months later that you suddenly care about the deaths and the suicides and CIW that we told you about 8 months before. You don't come at me with that. Come at my community correct. So that's what informs me, being that anti-authoritative person and knowing that we can do it. And if they saved me, I can save them.
I have been part of the growing community of folks who critique framework around our juvenile and criminal legal systems as only being about mass incarceration, and have long been writing and asking folks to think more broadly around this question of criminalization. And in the same way that our interest in making sisters visible is sharing narratives about what happens behind bars in our carceral facilities, our correctional facilities, we also see this kind of criminalization take place in different spaces, right? Detention facilities as a part of the criminal legal system, and other spaces. And so how has your narrative been informing your work, Issa, in this space, sort of broadening not just our concepts around incarceration, but other gender identity as well?
Yeah, so I'm wearing a t-shirt that says "Mi existir es resistir," and that translates to my just mere existence is resisting, right? It's in constant resisting of many systems, and so it's not just when I'm in meetings with ICE, and it's not just when I'm getting arrested in action, it's not just when I'm visiting a detention facility and being critical of how they're keeping our people safe. It is my everyday, it is when I leave my home, and sometimes actually in my home. A couple weeks ago, the week of New Year's, my father, who is a pastor, we had a very intense conversation because after 15 years, he wanted me to come back to church. And we had a very just heart-to-heart conversation, but I remember reflecting after that conversation with some friends of just in all aspects of my life, I'm constantly having to validate, to legitimize, to say trans people are people, that we are, our identities are as such, and how our gender pronouns, our chosen name, how we choose to present ourselves in our bodies, in our wardrobe, that it is all part of who we are. And so to understand that trans people are navigating so much hostility on a day-to-day basis, to understand that the humanity of transgender and gender nonconforming folks has been stripped of us throughout the years, even though we have existed in every single major civilization, that we didn't just appear this last year because of Caitlyn Jenner or because of other celebrities. So, I think that it's been an amazing year that we've had. It's been an amazing year we've had as in terms of the visibility and sort of the pop cultural moment, but in no way is it an indication of the realities that trans people are facing on a day-to-day basis. Because of the fact of the matter is, hello?
Just keep talking.
Okay. The fact of the matter is that our communities are in a survival mode within sort of our broader everyday lives to the lives of our communities that are inside detention centers and in prisons. The fact of the matter is that transphobia is very much a part of being incarcerated. Sexual assault is very much a part of a trans woman experience inside detention centers, inside prisons. 1 in 4 will be sexually assaulted within the first 12 months of entering a prison and detention center. And those are just a lot of the data and a lot of the collections and stories that we know is very much new because of the ways and complicated ways that the data collection can be for trans people inside detention. To have the agency to say that I'm a trans person would mean a certain amount of scrutiny, would mean a certain amount of alienation, would mean that you're placing yourself, you're saying, I actually want to be harmed further because of how the system treats trans people inside detention. So I think that my story in the work that I do is very much connected to sort of the broader sort of resistance that exists in really navigating all aspects of our life. That I've had to learn to really stand grounded in my community because of all of the different ways that our identities are broken down, are scrutinized, are pathologized, are criminalized. And so I think, to me, understanding that I am not just here on my own, that I am here on the backs of so many freedom fighters who have been very much a part of this fight, in thinking about Miss Major and thinking about Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, all of the amazing sort of rebellions that have happened to really put on the forefront our liberation as trans people. And to also understand, I think part of my connection to my identity is really also reconnecting to sort of my indigenous roots as a person, to really understand that our identities as Mexicanos, as Latinos, is very much rooted in indigenous culture, and so to understand that trans people played a very key role within those civilizations and cultures is very much, it gives me a sense that there's power, there's strength, there's a strong history and lineage, and that to ground myself in that when I'm in spaces that I am being challenged in policy spaces, and having to testify at a congressional hearing on violence in our communities, where I'm given 2 minutes to sort of lay out the policy ask and sort of the context that our communities are facing. So,
you know, it's interesting because all the research will tell us that incarceration of women is very closely tied to victimization. Sexual victimization, substance victimization, physical violence, and other forms of oppression. And yet, often when we're talking about the incarceration movement and making sisters visible, that piece of the narrative gets lost. And I appreciate that all of you are bringing that into this space and centering it in a way that I think will help us construct a more useful engagement around what it means to make sisters visible. Last night we were talking about the sort of the nature of incarceration being predominantly a male space, right? 80% of those who are incarcerated are male, leaving 20% for women. And what that means is when we talk about mass incarceration, we tend to be talking about males. But when we talk about mass criminalization, we can be more inclusive in our discussions about that. Now, thinking about the mass criminalization, how do you think that this violence, this experience with violence, this experience with victimization has shaped the identities of women who are at risk of being put into facilities?
So on my other job, I'm a commissioner with the Civil Brand Commission. That's the jail I used to go into in my earlier days when I was going in and out of jail. So I got put on this commission to inspect jails. And I go into the jails and I just can't believe the conditions in which women are having to live under, work under. They have these 3-tier beds that they call coffins that women slide into to go to sleep. And if you got the top bunk, you bump your head. You can't sit up in it. If you got the middle bunk, you can't sit up in it. But you have a tendency to try to sit up. So we brought to the sheriff's attention a couple of women who had hit their heads on the light that shines right above their bed. Friday, I was in the mental health ward. MOH, they call it, mental observation house. And I went there precisely because there was a young woman, mentally ill, that you might have heard of Africa, the man that was killed down on Skid Row, and this woman picked up the baton. She didn't hit anybody with it. She just picked it up, and she got threatened with a life sentence. And an attorney and myself put together a plan and got her released, and she violated the plan, and they locked her back up. So I went there to check on her, and I went to the MOH dorm. She's literally locked down 23 hours a day. She's getting no medication. And the hour that she does get out of that cell, she's handcuffed to a bench, and they call that recreation. So, I'm writing that up too. But, all I can do is write it up, and all I can do is bring it to the sheriff's attention. And I keep writing it up, and I keep going back. But the conditions, the lack of medical care, that's why realignment came into effect. But it's also happening at the county level. These women are not getting medical care, not getting dental care, not getting glasses, not getting, you know, basic medical care. So it's horrible. And it's heart-wrenching. Really difficult to walk up in there week after week and day after day. And what I spot check and see, you know, I can get that addressed. But it's a whole jail system that needs to be dismantled and torn apart. And, you know, most of these people could be in our community. They don't need to be held in those types of conditions. And I mean, it's heart-wrenching to see what they're doing to people inside those jails and those institutions.
So what I hear you saying in many ways is that we talk about violence often with women as if it ends, as if it ends when they're incarcerated. But really, I mean, I know this is not news to anyone in this room, but it is news to some people who are not in this room, right? About the ways in which these institutions perpetuate the violence and the ways in which this violence is even made worse when they are in facilities that are supposed to be correctional, right? And, you know, I think all of us are in a space where we're amplifying voices and we're talking about these conditions and we're standing with her behind bars. But it's interesting because, you know, organizations like Justice Now, like New Way of Life, like the Transgender Law Center,
Essie's group.
Essie, like,
Hey,
you know, like Time for Change. Like there are different organizations that also working on the inside, right? I feel like I was talking earlier about a group in San Francisco. Organizations that go on the inside to amplify the voices of women and girls as they are also incarcerated. Can we talk a little bit about, we're going to go to girls in a second, but can you talk a little bit about how Justice Now amplifies the voices of women on the inside and how that's a critical part of making sisters visible? Do you have the microphone? Oh, they took it. Yeah. Okay.
It's not working. Yeah, I don't think this okay. Will do that.
Okay. We can use our outside voices.
So can folks hear me okay? Yeah. So, you know, I mean, I started working with Justice Now while I was inside, and the whole purpose is centering the very lived experience. The whole purpose is that I know since, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement has started up, or even before that it happened in Black RJ actually is, to believe Black women. So it's kind of to believe the people, period. To believe the people suffering, period. You know, before it was phrased that way. Go and be Justice Now coming in, and when we're telling what's happening, it's not, well, prove it. It's, okay, we believe you, now let's work to get the prison to give up whatever paperwork, your medical records, whatever's in your records to prove what you're saying. It's not prove to me first. So, also in that we can't, how are we going to fight for what's happening in the prisons if we're not talking to the people in the prisons to know what's happening? Even so it's critical to have that voice. Even now, I've been out since 2009. I have my experience that I can weave in, but I'm not in there today. I'm not sitting in a cell right now. I don't know what's going on. They changed the 602 form. I was a 602 queen 10 years ago, but I might not be able to navigate it now. I got everything down to clear underwear. Ask me now. Ask me now. You know, in the way that you word things. But so it changes. The system changes and morphs. And I mean, it's smart. It is. How they're so dumb on one hand and smart on the other is interesting and frustrating because they do so, excuse my language, some of the dumbest fuckery you've ever seen. It's like, do you have brains? But they're so insidiously smart at the same time. And they morph and they move. Yes. And so you always have to keep pace with them. So if you're not communicating with the people that are living that direct oppression, then you are out of touch with what's going on. And you're going to you might even buy into their BS and think they're doing something good and something right. Like, you know, like Susan said, if we weren't hearing it from the people of like, why is a parole officer in my house knocking at my door like he's my man, you know, then we wouldn't have people pushing back to say, you can't come in my house and run my program.
You can't come to a New Way of Life.
So it's a Centering, it's believing the experience. It's giving power back. It's empowering people in a world that has no power, giving voice where they have no voice, going in and reading statements to legislators. And that's one of the most disempowering spaces. The people inside are the most sheltered from that and cry for it the most because they don't understand a politician sells his words well, but really doesn't care. That's probably my only frustration is how do I translate? I don't want to tell people that already know they have no value, they have no fucking value. That is hard. You know, and so how do I keep that power? But I think I'm getting a little off point. But the whole point is to empower them, because even if all you get is a sunshade over the medline window, you got something because your voice was heard. And it's this far, but we keep pushing it this far and this far and this far. And without that voice and without that knowledge, without that intimate knowledge of the experience on the day-to-day, on the ground, that's what grassroots is, on the ground, the day-to-day, the experience, the hard knocks, you know, that's it. You need that. You need that grit and that dirt to work with these dirty people up there.
You know, it's interesting because in so many ways, girls are primed to not be believed, and to live in the space of not being believed. Right? And again, going back to the victimization and sort of the constant way in which truths are questioned, that particularly if they're living in spaces without resources or privilege, you tend to be like, nobody's going to believe me anyway, so what's the point, right? And that consciousness doesn't go away as we mature, right? In many ways, the systems reinforce that, and our schools reinforce that, and our jobs reinforce that, and our relationships reinforce that, to the point where if we do get into conflict with the criminal legal system or the juvenile legal system, individuals' truths begin to morph and shift, right, depending on what they feel may be most protective to them. When we're in spaces where a truth-telling is a matter of life or death, as they often are in these spaces, how do you amplify the voices of women who are harmed in a way that keeps them safe and yet also keeps them visible in these spaces?
I think that's been one of the more challenging pieces within a lot of the campaign work that we've been launching in coalition with the Not One More campaign and with other partners who are doing abolition work around the conditions that trans people are facing, is that to understand that, and I think that sits the heaviest with me when I go and visit a detention center and I know that, yes, it's a really long day and I'm exhausted, but at the end of the day, my folks are still inside, my community's still inside, and I get to leave. And that having to navigate the fact that are we going to cause them more harm? But we've found that to really uplift the nuance of how transphobia functions within detention centers and within the prison system, and to also couple that and think about how do we have organizations who are already doing monitoring conditions, that are going and have visitation programs, how do they also think about transphobia and how that's manifesting inside, right? And so, because we do need that monitoring of conditions, we do need sort of the everyday interactions and the harm that's happening. And we've actually found a great success with that, because ICE and because the police state and because the Department of Justice, all of this is new to them in a lot of ways. Just this year, the Ninth Circuit published a decision to really understand how trans is different from gay and queer and lesbian. Because for many years within the court system, it's very much convoluted in thinking of like, oh, there's gay rights or there's marriage, so that means that in other countries or in places that this exists, that LGBT rights exist, that trans people are actually now have sort of equal protections and all this sort of, the illusion of sort of freedom, right? And I think that for the Transgender Law Center and many trans organizations has been really to uplift the ways in which the gender binary has devastated all of our communities, and how it's really magnified inside detention centers, how it's really magnified through police interactions, how it's really magnified through the prison system and the injustice system that very much perpetuates this idea of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman in our societies.
You know, this idea of womanhood is one that is not, it's not a universal concept, right? And what's interesting, and what I think we should explore further, even on this panel, is how, particularly among Black women and girls, our girls are seen as little women. That there is this sort of compression of age that prematurely ages our girls in a way that sets expectations for how they engage. It shapes understanding about the ways in which they are responded to in public spaces and private spaces. It shapes how we read behaviors and how we respond to those behaviors. And yet, even as we talk about standing with her, often we forget to stand with the young hers, right? We're talking about women so often that we forget to talk about girls, especially those who are at highest risk of becoming women who are incarcerated or who are currently living in spaces that are criminalizing. Susan, can you talk a bit about that continuum and how your work can help to shape our understanding of what needs to happen to bring our girls into this space to make them more visible?
So we have a agency that's called the Department of Children and Family Services. Their emphasis, their resources are put towards placement of children out of home, not trying to reunite children with their moms or fathers. The most money goes to out-of-home placement and to adoption. You know, the second home that I got at A New Way of Life was because I was watching women losing their children, primarily because they didn't have a place to take them to. And the judge would say, parental rights denied, parental rights lost. And these women would come back from court just devastated, and I was devastated with them because I knew what it meant to just lose a child. So this has went on for 17 years. It's continuing to go on. So that job, that other job I was telling you about is also inspecting group homes. And so in the inspection of these group homes, I see everything that this group home is doing with the children, from their case plan to the amount of money they're paid. And you can give a group home $6,000 to $12,000 a month to house my child, but you can return that child to me and tell me I can get $340 a month? Right. And you know, you're giving this child allowance, you're giving this child $100 a month for clothing, and you're giving this child all these different benefits. But if I'm lucky enough to get my child back, I get $340 a month to add to my budget for this child. So, you know, the emphasis is on separating daughters, sons, mothers, and breaking apart our community. With that, I want to say, wherever and however you can, reach out to help someone through some difficult period. Even if it's a little inconvenience for us, we need to be doing that. We need to be doing that with the quickness. You know, the things that people are going through and experiencing as a result of being caught up in these different multiple systems, it's just horrendous. I have a young lady now, Ingrid. She got out under Prop 47. When she got out, she was arrested because she ran in the store, left her baby in the car, and she got 2 years. So she had 3 children. One was 14, one was 2, and one was a newborn. She got 2 years. When she got home, Her 14-year-old was 6 months pregnant, contracted pre-chlamydia. That's how she found out she was pregnant. Went into the hospital. Now she has, you know, now this is 3 generations. So we're trying to get this family together. You know, I've got a little place that I've kept empty because the minute the judge says they have a place, when the social worker comes and look, yeah, we got a place for them. Get this family together. This child needs her mama. They need to be together. This was traumatic for everybody. You know, she was raped in the foster home, and the guy's in jail, but she's still traumatized. We all traumatized. You know, remind me of my story. I'm traumatized too. So the best I can do is try to, you know, help and support to get this back together. But the emphasis, what I'm saying is that these systems are, you know, designed to separate, keep us separated. You know, what does a child do when he's got all this stuff in the foster home and comes back to a poor mama in a poor community? What's the rebellion going on there? You know, so yeah, it's a bit much.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot, right? And there's nothing post about the trauma, right? And so as we're thinking about these spaces of healing, and we're thinking about sort of new ways of framing opportunities to, you know, bring women and girls' stories to the fore, I'm hearing you say that having conversations about families is important,
Yeah.
and connecting and responding in that way. Misty or Issa, do you have other thoughts about ways to bring girls into this space with women?
Yeah, I think one thing, me and my roommate were actually talking about some of this last night, is growing up with the idea that our bodies are for consumption. Not only do we not have voice, we are taught from a very early age, we are for others' consumption.
Yeah.
So you couple that, and especially, and I know it's not my experience, but to say that, you know, I feel like there's a lot of hypersexualization that goes on with Black girls.
Sure.
So couple that with, I'm for consumption. I have no voice, but I have power in my sexuality. Mm-hmm. And so what does that push and drive? And so I think that's, and so when you have no family support, when you have none of these other things, you take your power where you can get it. And I think it even feeds, or you go the opposite way and totally asexualize yourself, but you become more like a man and you enter that violent dynamic and how to control and how to have that power. And so I think that's how we bring it in. I think Susan makes a very good point. How do we uplift families? How do we teach families? We need to give voice to girls. We need to, I wish somebody would have told me so long ago that I could wear a miniskirt and that doesn't give people the right to whistle at me, tell me anything, that I am not for somebody's consumption. You know, and that's what we really need to teach, that we have voice and we are not for consumption. And, you know, and I can't fully answer that because again, you know, not my, but I think those are huge important pieces, you know, when you feel like your power comes from others' ability to consume you. And that's something that we need to confront, I think, across the board when dealing with little girls and raising them to be powerful women and breaking these cycles.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't help but think of, you know, in talking in this conversation about girls and young, you know, like our youth is, you know, having that experience of going to high schools and middle schools and having a conversation just around gender and trans communities and how open our youth are and you know, and especially like the younger, like when I've gone to elementary, like it's just this sort of this place of curiosity and also all the different ways that they've already internalized these messages that our society has like crammed down their throat. So like the hypersexualization, the ways in which I think our young people and especially trans youth and trans girls are quick to think about their bodies and feminizing their bodies to the point of risky sort of procedures, you know, and I think that we see a lot of times our trans youth navigating sort of the complexities of adolescence and then adding on top of that sort of the strict notions of how we need to think about gender identity. And so we've seen devastating effects. We see that the highest rates for trans youth and homelessness are connected to transphobia. And in accessing services, how trans youth and trans young women experience discrimination and sort of said, no, you actually, because your ID and because of sort of your presentation, we have to put you with the young men. And how that continues to like that further, again, strip away the humanity. And so again, in thinking about service providers and thinking about our intake forms of how we only capture sort of 2 boxes of complexity, right? And so for our young folks and young trans youth who are part of all of these systems, the school system, all of these service providers, right? And so they're not given the room and the space and complexity to hold their identities.
Right. So that's an important point. As you were talking, Susan was saying funding drives that. Funding drives that. Yeah. So it's interesting, you know, when we talk about who is constructing policies and who is shaping a lot of our own consciousness around identity. And you know, the truth is we're having a conversation where we're intentionally centering these, but all of us are in spaces where we're usually the ones going, what about? What about? What about? Right? And it's always like, okay, this conversation is not, you know, gender inclusive. This conversation is not engaging women and girls rigorously. This conversation or this funding stream is extremely exclusive or very limiting in certain ways. And so much of our work has been to agitate, yes. Right? And our presence usually comes with the knowledge that we're coming with this information and with this agitation, right? Yes. And so I think it's important for us to think about possible new ways of thinking through, you know, how funders might then respond, right? Or what strategies have you found to be successful in bringing in the community of funders who would be receptive to these ideas, who can help build capacity? I personally am of the mind that we can't give anyone, we can't empower someone else, but we can give people the capacity to be empowered and to empower themselves. And so when we think about the investments that can be made and that we have seen to work in our communities and on these issues with women and girls, what are we finding to be you know, helpful, successful? I mean, I'll start, right?
There's a lot actually. That's I'm trying to like.
All the questions in that. You know, I have to say, for the last, I think 14 years. I think it's 14 years in Rojo. The Women's Foundation has consistently supported a new way of life in the way of building leadership and organizing with all of us or none. And that's been good, clear support around women's issues. You know, there has been times that in other spaces there's a funding request that it just don't fit. And it's kind of like putting the square hole, round peg in the square hole, or however that goes. And you just have to realize that you just can't take everything or do everything or be everything to everybody. But around women, you know, and girls, and the other thing I have to say is that I am so grateful that A New Way of Life has a rich individual donor base. Very important. That supports our work and allows us to keep doing the work. So, you know, those are things that partnerships and relationships that are just really important to build as you go about doing your work. And I mean, there's something that all of us not only can be doing, but has to be doing. Has to, if we're ever gonna change this this dynamic of oppression and stealing our people, stealing our valuable people. I mean, there's a woman who spent 16 years inside of prison, and she's talented, she's valuable, she's smart, she's articulate. And I'm about to pass on a new way of life. She's about to be the executive director in about 3 or 4 more months. You know, and I'm going to support her to lead that organization. But when we talk about building leadership, and we talk about giving voice to people, we talk about passing on and supporting and building a community of powerful people, you know, I guess we have to do more than lip service. So I'm gonna step back a bit and support her, you know, to take the organization to its next height. When I was with Karen, that first plane trip to San Francisco, I never dreamed a new way of life would go the places that it went, that it's gone. But it's gonna go further with younger, fresher, vibrant leadership that we're passing off. So that's the other thing, is building space and giving people the opportunity to lead through not only victories, but mistakes, and support them through that.
And so Justice Now has an entirely different leadership structure, organizational structure to do some of that. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking as I was listening to Susan talking. I was thinking, oh yeah, right now we're kind of in this exciting time. Like we do have folks like, also, I think Anuja just funds like everybody.
And we should fund more.
So, you know, that have been with us for a long time and have believed in our vision for a long time and have invested in our work for a long time. But also, yes, we said we want to reflect the communities we're trying to build. So let's break down the hierarchy. No more ED, no more co-directors. There's 3 of us, we are co-directors, quote unquote, for the purpose of signing papers. But we hold our individual expertise and every decision is collective, down to we pull in our interns, our fellows, folks inside, allies. We're much broadening out that collective decision making. Our interns have helped us do some amazing fundraising with feedback on ideas. Like, don't ever weed out the young growing minds. You know, so and then at the beginning of the year, we weren't getting the funding that we were hoping to get. And we were kind of getting stressed out about why someone were like, they don't like us, are we not doing it right, what's happening? And then we actually had someone come in and just completely tear down the way our grants were written. Like, tore us down and made us feel like uneducated. like we should have been sitting back in kindergarten, like really. But what we had done was and I learned grant writing through the organization I work at, so I modeled what had been done. And this person was like, reading this, nobody knows who you are. Who are you and who are your people? This just says like, oh, the X number of LGBT, queer, X number of this, and like, what is that saying? Talk about you, talk about who you are and what you're doing. So we've completely redone that. So not only have we rebuilt and restructured our leadership, but we actually write with a much more authenticity. We actually tell more of the stories of who are our folks, who is driving our work. And it's resonating, so for the last half of the year, we're like, we get a letter, woo, we get another letter, woo. We're still small and grassroots and we're not exactly hiring yet, but it's encouraging to see like, oh, when you break down and show your authenticity, show your desire and what you're driving to do and who you're doing it for and who's doing it with you, then people want to invest in it.
And we had a conversation outside before this panel about how many times you're the only, right? And that when we're in space, and many of us are the only, but you in particular feel like you are the only representing an entire community around these issues. And so what have you found to be improving the capacity for there to be, centered trans women of color in these spaces?
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to say around the funding piece. I mean, just to understand from a basic level that I think the stat that's used is that less than 1% of all foundation giving is given to trans-led work and trans organizing, trans-specific work. And so I think the funding question is a huge piece that we've seen. We've seen sort of like build up within the last several years, especially now that like marriage is like, you know, a victory for the community for a lot of folks. But in particular, I think for trans folks, it's been a sort of complicated journey around how we fit into that conversation. I think that what's scary or what's concerning for a lot of us advocates at this moment is just how mainstream or large capacity LGBT organizations or even some racial justice organizations are starting to include trans communities or pivot sort of from marriage to now trans rights being the sort of next frontier of the fight or whatever. And so that is concerning on some levels around sort of the ways in which they've historically not prioritized our communities, how they do not have trans people working, how they actually, in a lot of ways, have tokenized our communities. And there's just countless stories of how that's happening, right? But my role at TLC is fairly new. And a lot of the work has been to do a scan of sort of the leadership and actually the on-the-ground work that our communities are doing, but are often not legitimized on paper, and very much has, you know, they've been doing this work on the ground without any recognition, without anyone sort of saying this is a leader in our community. And so, and this intentional search is definitely intense because they're often in non-traditional spaces doing organizing work. They're doing organizing work out of their living room. They're out of their cars doing case management, meeting folks where they're at, and they're not a part of a nonprofit, and they're just very much doing this work individually because of knowing the risk factors, knowing how much violence is devastating our communities. And so I think that I think at the end we're gonna show a video of how earlier this last year we convened. We had a retreat for immigrant trans women who faced deportations, who have been in detention centers, and it was a very powerful moment where they got to share sort of the exact, the stories and the advocacy work and the nuances of the challenges of building leadership and reimagining leadership, not through sort of maybe traditional notions of traditional leadership pipelines, but really to understand the context that trans communities are very much in an uphill battle and sort of the widespread discrimination, all the barriers, right? And acknowledging like how do we meet our folks where they're at. And so I think part of the funding question is to definitely have trans people who have been doing this work, because there are a lot of folks that have been doing this work that are not included in these funding conversations. Just a couple months ago, I was invited to be a part of a grant making like decision weekend, and where we collect all of these applications and we go through them. And it was very eye-opening to see how many organizations say they're doing trans-led work, and how many folks in that room were ready to give the money to those folks because they actually don't know. And so as the only trans person in that group, I was like,
they tell a good story.
Right, I mean, on paper it was beautifully written, and they had a lot of supporting materials to support that claim, but I knew a whole other story. I was like, that's actually not true. Yeah. And so I had to really, in that moment, I had to really advocate and really kind of push and drive sort of like the reality, and actually say, actually, some of the folks that are doing that work didn't even apply. And so that was a very eye-opening conversation, because I would imagine there's very few trans people who are in those spaces when it comes time to, you know, make those decisions.
So, you know, so going back to where I started then, why does the caged bird sing, right? Why, what is the value of centering a population that has been so marginalized in this discussion about criminal justice reform, or juvenile justice reform? What's the value? Why are we singing?
You know, I sing because it's a part of my power. I sing because I have voice. You know, I sing for the woman who comes out and finds her voice. You know, there are small victories around along the way while we were waiting on the huge shift, right? But I have to sing in the process of that, because if not, then what do I do? Cry? You know, or be mad? Or be angry? Or be enraged? You know, how do I keep going with that heavy, heavy, heavy burden? And I've had some heavy, heavy, heavy burdens. You know, I told you about some of them when I started. That wasn't the only one. That was the tipping point. That was the one that where I jumped off. You know, so, you know, I sing because, hell, I can.
All right, why do you sing?
Could you imagine what it would be like if we didn't? I mean, if we're mad and disgusted now, could you imagine if the voices were silent, if no singing happened? Singing is resistance. That is absolute resistance. Speaking up is absolute resistance. That's why, because I'm an asshole and I like making people mad and uncomfortable. I get true joke. No, but I like doing it for a positive thing. I like reading letters to say thank you, because if you didn't care, we wouldn't care. We would get we're so used to, and I was so used to it, you know, and so that's why. It's because I don't want to imagine what it would look like if we did it.
Why do you sing?
So many reasons. I think if I don't sing, the system will say, oh look, we've granted you these policies now, like it's a win. Recently I was, you know, it was June, the announcement of gay marriage was announced. It was like, DC was buzzing, the nation was like, oh yay. And I remember the week after I was in a meeting with ICE, and this like policy space, and I remember that week after this memo around guidelines on how to treat and detain trans immigrants was released, and how the ICE official at that moment very much said, like, look, you all have gay marriage and now you have these guidelines. And it was a moment of like, wow, you really don't get how like this policy in itself is actually going to continue the harm and drive further the legitimacy to keep and actually actively search for trans people now. And so I think I sing also for all the women that are in the altar at Ela para Translatinas, which is a trans immigrant space in the Mission. And that is like my political home where I kind of grew up. And so we have this space that we honor our women every single day who have died violently. And you know, I remember all of those women who have encouraged me and who have just given me so much energy. I sing also for my grandmother, my abuelita, who just, is a source of strength and sort of the resiliency that woman had and held it down for our family. I think those are all the powerful reasons at this moment that I sing.
Who out there wants to offer why you sing? Yes?
Because we're valuable, and inside of us, each of us knows that we're here for a reason. We were born for love and care, and you know, we are entitled because we're here. And so you do sing because you know inside your spirit, your soul knows as much as it wants.
Yep.
I recently bought some stamps, and they were a Maya Angelou quote, and it said, a bird doesn't sing because it has an answer. It sings because it has a song. And so for me, that really resonated because it's always, in this society, we're validated when we come up with the answer, instead of being validated working towards the solution and being part of the process, which is really where the work and transformation happens. It's actually not at the end, it's actually during. And that's where a lot of us, we don't always make it to the end. You know, we're in a movement where we are resisted for this power, and some of the people from my community are actually murdered. So they don't always make it to the end, but it doesn't mean they weren't a part of that journey. So for me, I honor the journey, and that's why I say.
Anyone else? Yes.
Okay, so I was just Minnie Richardson. Everybody know Minnie Richardson? So I have it on my, I listened to it for my life for in a million places, and use this for my life for in a million spaces. But oh, the sweet delight to sing with all my might, you know, to feel the sweet delight of making it right. It's like that song, it lifts me up so many times, and it makes me laugh because I got put out of junior high school glee club because they say I couldn't carry a tune. I get in the mirror and I say, oh, the sweet delight. With all my might. Anyway, I like that song.
Go ahead.
I sing because after 15 years, I feel like I got my voice back. I was so suppressed. I was so depressed. I was so angry. I was so low, I didn't think I could come off the floor. And this is what I say, I got my wings back. I could fly again. I got a voice, I could speak. I no longer, I have this inner peace, the happiness, although my peace still got a little ways to go. But I'm almost there, and I can fly, and I'm happy. I'm very happy. It's
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like for me, I think, singing's in my bloodline. And I take it back to the slavery time when slaves, when some of them would want to escape, they would have quilts, and they would stitch into those quilts escape routes to freedom. And they would hang it over the line as if it was just, laundry that was drying, and master didn't even know what was going on. And so on the other side, while they are saying, make a left here, make a right on market, whatever it is, they would sing to distract, the master. And so for me, I feel like singing is a direct, way of just resisting oppression. In a very creative way that is just transformative.
I sing because I have a voice, and I don't ever want those that come after me or those that are with me to think that they can't use that voice. So that voice is for me and those that can't sing, and those that couldn't sing, and to teach those to sing. And that is for my children, and my children's children, and all of our children. Never stop, never give up.
For over 20 years, I didn't know that I could sing. And when I began to discover that my song of pain was not really a solo, but it was part of the chorus. It encouraged me to continue singing for all the other people, and I won't say men and women, all the people who have not yet discovered that they too have a voice that's part of the chorus. So I keep singing for them.
And it's interesting because that choir is growing.
Yes.
And that's the problem.
Yes.
In some ways, right? And it's interesting, we talk about it. And I asked that question because all of us, we all sing in one way or another, whether we chose to show it here and share it here or not. And we're singing because we're responding. We're seeing it, we're responding, and we're living in a space that is increasing in urgency, right? Women are the fastest growing population of those who are incarcerated, right? The rate is growing. Policies are continuing to criminalize women and girls. The criminalization is growing faster than the incarceration is growing. And other systems are impacted by that, whether they can find employment, whether housing is available, healthcare, education. The systems are connected in such a way that the whole livelihood of one's being and ability to care is impacted by whether or not someone is deemed culpable of something, right? This aura of punishment that follows so many. And there are more and more of us who are feeling like we need to respond
and more of us who are impacted and affected by this work, and our institutions are being designed increasingly to respond to various aspects of it, and in some ways, not fast enough, right? Because we're seeing this growth, and we're here today, and we're here this weekend, partly because we recognize that we're among the group of people who are the singers, and that we need to create a song that can reach more people, right? And our song needs to be spoken in different languages. And our song needs to be in different genres. And our song needs to be hummed sometimes, right? Because it needs to sit within us rather than be projected out. And so I think that there is, a way in which, we're framing this work around our personal narratives and our ability to reach out in community in a way that we can't lose sight of in this work. And that so many of us have been driven by our own love for the work, but especially, our experiences. And I do want to add one piece to the academics in the room who are doing research and producing scholarship in this space, that is also really important for us to be in partnership in participatory action research with affected populations. And some of us are also affected, recognized, but we're also in spaces where we're encouraged to speak a different language, right? And what that does is it takes us away from individuals many times in communities who are also living in these spaces. And so, one of the things that I think is critical to this conversation is to really think about the partnerships that can exist in this room, the networking that can happen in this room, to increase the rigor of the scholarship that's created on this issue because it involves the voices of those who are affected. You want to say something, Susan, to that point? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we are working on an employment research project for women. And it's been really rich in learning and the thought about entrepreneurship activities has risen to the top of that. But it's been really, really an honor and rich to actually work with you, allow those that participate in our programs and projects to actually give voice and understand that they're informing something. For them to get a little something in the process of it, because that's important too, because everybody's experience is valuable. But to actually
She's talking about money.
Yeah. Y'all know what something.
So we're clear.
Y'all know what something is. And then it was a nice amount that somebody could do something with, but to be able to do that and then to have their voices rise to the top and understand that they're informing a process that could impact and grow out was good all around. So yeah.
Are there
thank you for that.
Of course, thank you.
Can I say something?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, and another thing of allies and academics, and to say, me personally, I believe that partnership is needed and is valid because I had anger. I knew things were jacked up. I had all these experiences, but if Justice Now and the academics of the time had not come in and given me language and framework to name it, that is so important to come in and give people a way to talk about it. And that it doesn't develop on our own in our own brains. We wake up with an epiphany. So academics, allies, that is also a very important piece, just to be able to come in and give us a way to talk about and a way to frame the experiences that we've had.
So I want to open it up. We have 7 minutes. There are questions and comments. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure how to frame this question, so bear with me, and I hope it doesn't take us 7 minutes to get it out. But so one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is how, in our understanding of experiences of cis women within our criminalized state, and particularly cis women of color, Black women, those that are disproportionately targeted in that gender identity. And at the same time as we understand that trans women, and particularly trans women of color, have different but related experiences and are in a different place of their own movement organizing, and emergence and claiming space and becoming and being visible and dictating what that visibility means. I'm curious how we, what is the question I want to ask? I feel like the question I want to ask is, there is a concerted effort in some spheres of like traditionally reproductive justice, women of color led, or other kind of feminist spaces to acknowledge and include the experiences of trans women to some degrees of success and failure and co-optation granted. And I'm wondering, where are the places where we're actually really working together, acknowledging both at once? Not that it's the same experience. Not as if saying, you know, for feminist organizations or whatever to say like, and trans women, as if that's like, you're just like us. And we all have the same experience. Like, that makes their experience actually invisible and makes women's, like, cis women's experiences invisible at the same time. So I'm wondering, where are the spaces where we get to acknowledge that our experiences of oppression are related and coming from the same system that we experience differently. Where are the spaces where we actually acknowledge that and find where we work together on shit? Sorry, I keep cursing, and there's so much of this. I'm really trying not to okay, I'm like, roll it in. Anyway. But, do you know what I'm saying? It's like where, and part of it is I wonder if what I would call like movements led by trans women of color, like for trans lives, in a very visceral moment, like where lives are at stake. Is that just not necessary right now? Like, is that too far ahead? Or like, I'm just curious, where are those moments where we go, our struggle is related and we're unique in all of our facets along the spectrum of femininity and womanhood? And what do we do well together, acknowledging that there are different experiences and different ways of discrimination that doesn't just, you know, blanket over everything as if it's all the same, because it's not. And we need to acknowledge it. So
Yeah, that's the question, right? And I'm sure you want to take it. But that to me feels like the question, right? Like, where are cis and trans women working together well, and what are some of the missed opportunities, and also what are some of the ways in which that partnership might enhance a more collective and responsive engagement around criminal and legal system reform?
Yes. Boom. 2 minutes.
I mean, I feel like it's a challenging question. I would say that there's definitely, I mean, I think I've seen some openings. Last year, I, along with some other leaders, convened 100 trans leaders at the Insight Conference in Chicago, and we had our own pre-convening that was separate from the rest of the conference. I remember those conversations with Insight that we very much, yes, I think they for many years have like figured out ways and have had conversations and panels and workshops that had trans folks there, and yet they were challenged and there was been some hiccups. And in this moment, and thinking of organizing this space, and in this moment of thinking of the violence and the trauma and the heaviness that our community is facing right now, and how it's being acknowledged through the media, that we very much needed a space just for us because of how the violence that our communities are experiencing are very particular and very unique. And so, and also how there's this whole issue of trust. There's an issue of trust, I think, between cis women and between trans women. I think that needs to be built like intentionally and bit by bit. I would say my experience at ELA para Translatinas, it's taken us many years to find that, to get our stride and to really build with other cis Latina raza women. In particular, I'm thinking of Mujeres Unidas y Activas who've been holding it down in the mission for years, and how we have also, but from like, I think it's just been within the last years that we've really, like, we've shown up for each other in these really intentional ways where, to the point where we had our leadership retreat and they were very much, so they've just shown up incredibly, and we have for them as well. So I just think that I think it's a matter of time. I think it's just a matter of finding those openings, and to have, I think, both our spaces and then spaces where we have cross dialogue, and to like really build the connections. Because I will say, within the issue of the police state and the violence from the police in particular, and detention conditions, I would say we really need support. We really need folks to really understand the ways that transphobia is manifesting the violence and the conditions, because there's not a lot of trans leaders that are actually they're not supported in this work. I mean, I would say we were talking about TGIJP, which is an amazing organization. I mean, it's like the only one, I think, in the country that is led by a trans woman that Ms. Major's been holding down, and now Janetta, and so it's very much been underfunded, under-resourced for many years. And so I think that, you know, the ways in which they engage both within like the local deep root work and then also the policy work, there's very few, and I definitely feel like there's a huge crisis and a huge need for trans women to be supported in this work.
So I'd like to say that all of us in the formerly incarcerated and convicted people's movement, we intentionally and brought in, you know, the other communities, trans being one of them, to be inclusive of everybody, because what we recognize here is that that we can't let our differences be bigger than our similarities. All of our lives, all of our children's lives, all of our community here is on the line. And in that, we don't want to let, how would you say, perfection be the enemy of progress. You know, I don't know if my trauma is any different than your trauma. All I know is that it hurts like hell, and I need relief. You know, and our communities, our lives, you know, I went into the dorm, the trans dorm, the gay dorm, and the jail, and you know, I toured the sheriff a new butthole there. They wouldn't even give them cleaning supplies. You know, and so, you know, I think that we need to come together and build together and work together and make change together and love together and support one another, you know, together, and just, you know, let our differences go and embrace our similarities and move this train forward.
So, yeah. So we have reached our time. But I want to give the panelists one last opportunity to talk a bit about maybe a key lesson learned in how to make sisters visible. You know, so one, please, just one. There are many, and we can maybe do that after in the free time, but if you could share one key learning about how to make sisters visible.
Go
ahead, we'll start here.
I don't know if this is really about how to make sisters visible, but one thing that, and for some reason didn't get around to saying, or maybe it just didn't get touched on, is realizing that we are used to create the very laws that they hyper-criminalize us under as female-bodied people. That is crazy. They use us to create the very laws that, because we are women, we're not supposed to commit these crimes, and become hyper-criminalized over. So I think that that's one thing to realize, that we sit in this funny position of being used to criminalize, to be criminalized. And I think,
Can you give an example? I don't know what you're talking
so like, well, what I'm saying is, like, when we increase sentencing laws, when we go into like increasing sentencing laws, it's often based off the victimhood of things that, you know, they trade about women victims. So when they increase sentences for violent crimes, when a woman commits a violent crime, they are viewed as worse than the men, because why would a mother, a woman, you know, we're supposed to be life givers and all of this. So that's what I mean. What I mean is, you know, they'll use us to say we need tougher sentences, and then sentence us to the max harshness under those laws for committing those crimes as women. So does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So that's what I'm saying, and that is, so I think in raising visibility, we have to acknowledge that, and I know someone was talking about being the victim of a crime and saying, stop using me to do this to my community. And so I think that that's something that we have to raise up is, you know, not allowing them to use us to victimize us. I think I got lost on that one, but I hope that made some kind of sense.
I mean, we'll show an example of what that means in a couple minutes with the video that we produced at the retreat. But I will say that, you know, visibility is a big it's a controversial question within trans communities because although pop culture and the media and magazine covers will have you believe a certain level of acceptance, the realities are quite different, and how also, you know, visibility is not sort of the only answer in terms of curbing the violence and in curbing like the state-sanctioned violence, because so often we want a quick, let's do a media campaign and put posters of trans people everywhere because then people will see a trans person, or like, you know, I don't know, just it can't be that simplistic. It can't be just sort of like creating a poster child and that's it. And so because of the violence that our folks are navigating, right? And so I will say though, trans people have very much across the board, and trans leaders are reaching very, like they're being pushed to limits and are really doing innovative and really exciting sort of strategies and putting their bodies on the line to demonstrate sort of the ways in which our communities are being impacted. So.
Every year I do a film festival. The film festival is called Justice on Trial. Every year I go after women films to actually feature as a part of the Justice on Trial film. Every year I can't find a women's film around criminal justice. And something's wrong with that. So, you know, what I do to create a platform for sisters to become visible is I do when a news camera comes by, when something comes by, I make sure that I am exposing one of the women within our homes or a woman to be able to stand and tell her story. I do the leadership, or not tell her story, but to speak to the issue in which they're talking about. What I do is I challenge different news outlets, the PBS station, Tavis Smiley or whoever, to feature this around a woman. You know, we are the fastest growing segment of the prison system. You know, put our face on that. If it's around voting, put our face on that. We vote too. So I push it out there, grandma style, I guess, you know. But, you know, we do the leadership development to give women ways to speak and teach them how to, you know, stay on point, and no matter what they ask you, tell them what you want them to hear, and things like that. So you know, well then no matter what they ask you, tell them what you want them to hear. So, you know, yeah, we do different types of trainings, and we, and in the way of life, we expose people to opportunities to get their voices heard.
So, I think, you know, I engage in different ways, and I'm just going to respond by saying that, you know, when I asked everybody to think about, you know, I know why the caged bird sings, there is a song that I grew up singing in the church, and as I sing, you know, people don't know the lyrics, but it's I sing because I'm happy, I sing because I know, I sing because I'm free. And I feel like this question around freedom is the open inquiry for our time together and for our work with the Stand With Her campaign and the work with Essie and our work together. It's really an open inquiry. It's what we're interrogating together, is what we continue to interrogate. What does freedom look like for us? How do we continue to operate in a space that makes sisters visible such that the freedom extends into our communities and impacts us and our loved ones in a very real way? So thank you for your time and attention this afternoon. Thank you to this amazing, brilliant panel. And we are...